So welcome everyone today. It's great to see you here on this very exciting topic on the use of immersive technologies like game engines to simulate things like climate change. My name is Tasha Fabricius. I'm a technology leader at Esri, and I'm thrilled to be moderating this panel today. At Esri, this topic is close to our hearts. We're the leader in geographic information systems, basically bringing together all of these different types of data with our tools and technologies, and then giving you the intersections to other third-party tools like game engines in this case. A couple of rules of engagement before we start. So there's going to be a Q&A after this panel, so have a think about some questions as we go along. If we don't get to answering your question today, you can always email us at southbysouthwestquestions@esri.com. And there'll be some interesting demos in room 417A after this session, so starting at 3:45 p.m. So I'd like to introduce my speakers with me here on stage today. So first up, we've got George McLeod here in the middle. He's the spatial data scientist, oceanographer, and educator at Old Dominion University. Alan Clinton, in the end there, Administrative Planning Officer at the County of Kauai. And sitting next to me here is Devin Levine, Principal and Co-founder of Halsey Levine and Associates. You can see a QR code here on the screen as well. So if you scan that, it's going to take you to a web page with more information about all the panelists here and also some examples of the things that you'll see today. So game engines, I feel like, for a lot of people, probably seems like a flashy thing still, and you might be wondering, how is it relevant to our session today? But game engines, there's so much more to game engines and to this real-time technology these days. So I'm going to start off with my first question, and that is, why game engines? Why mapping visualizations? Why are you using these tools to achieve your community climate goals or goals of a project? So George, I'll hand over to you to start us off on this.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction, Tasha. Thank you guys all for being here. Let me give you a little background on why I'm here. My university is in Norfolk, Virginia, which we're going to zoom in on here in a second. Let's launch that. Mid-Atlantic coast of the United States, for those of you not familiar, it's right on the ocean at the confluence of the Chesapeake Bay and effectively surrounded by water on 2 or 3 sides. And we have a serious problem. Well, we enjoy living by the water, but it's a challenge. It comes with the threat of flooding, the threat of storms. We can go to the next one. And we're trying to use our expertise to help our community. This is a community that's characterized by thriving tourism industry, heavy Department of Defense presence. We have the world's largest naval base. We have one of the largest deepwater ports in North America. Population is about 2.5 million people that have to live with the water. We're going to cycle through a few pictures that show how we adapt and how we deal, or the amount of water we deal with on a weekly, monthly basis. These pictures of flooding that you see are not storm flood events. These are tidal flooding events that occur on a regular basis. So the tide is up in the road, coming into our streets all over the place in our city, because we are sinking, our land is sinking, and the sea is rising. And so as scientists, geospatial scientists, oceanographers, we ask ourselves, how can we deploy our skills, our methods and technologies to solve this problem? And so we have a long history of doing 2D flood modeling. So mapping where the flood is going to intersect with our infrastructure and giving projections out into the future that folks like planners and others can use to make adaptation and mitigation measures. And so the next evolution of that is to say, we have these three-dimensional technologies, VR technologies, gaming engines is what we're talking about today. How can we advance what we're doing into those spaces to help communicate this risk more effectively? And not necessarily only more effectively, but to different audiences. We all consume information in different ways. And so some people are more influenced by a spreadsheet with the billions of dollars of loss that we might see from flooding and sea level rise. Others, a 2D map might fit the bill. Some people are influenced by someone talking at a podium. And yet others might be most influenced by a photorealistic visualization of the flooding and immersing themselves in that environment in VR or within some type of gaming interface engine. And so that's kind of what led us here to talk about this today, or led me here at least.
Thanks a lot, George. Alan, on to you for your comments on this topic.
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you all so much for coming. And to build already off of what George mentioned, as a local government official, we've been tasked by Mayor Kawakami to, when it comes to the discussion of community engagement, figure out ways that we can engage community on their terms. Historically, that may have meant that we did engage in more small group sessions. That meant that we came out with posters, information, planners, to do our best to communicate to a wide group of people in their spaces, their locations, and their places that are special to them. And with these new tools, we can really change the way that we calibrate, the way we communicate complicated data, especially information about things that people cannot quite yet envision, because hazards may be occurring well out into the 21st century. And while I thought, as a planner, naively, that we were upgrading from 2D to 3D visualizations, we already experience a 3D world. We live in a 3D world. It's our two-dimensional maps that require additional information, such as north arrows, scale bars, map, legends, titles, maybe an inset map, all additional information to help people hone in on what they're looking at. And so it's really exciting for us to start utilizing some of these new tools, because we can tailor the visual experience to a very wide range of different visual palettes. And so this animation here just showcases a policy that we'll be discussing a little bit later, where we've tried to bring in data about future conditions into our built environment for regulatory purposes that are required, not just recommendations. Another thing I want to mention is the importance of just engaging in the discussion. Transferring from 2D, 3D to game engine experiences is something that really forces us to be very thoughtful about being mindful of different vantage points, what it means to look at something from a different perspective, and kind of have that discussion about what does it look like to put on different lenses to view something from a different perspective. It's kind of funny we use the term lenses, as we oftentimes experience these types of 3D visuals with a headset or in a VR system, where you actually can, so to speak, modify the lenses that people are viewing these experiences through. So at the end of the day, it's how do we engage community on their terms, and we're really excited to utilize and leverage some of these tools to meet our community where they're at.
Thanks, Alan. And Devin, so how are you leveraging game engines, real-time technology for decision-making?
Yeah, I'd say now our use of game engines is probably about a third of our business, and it's really fueled us to become a global firm working with cities all over the world. But it started sort of innocently, where our office is in downtown Chicago and sort of right in the theater district. And we take our work very seriously, but we like to have fun and celebrate the wins. And so if we get a big contract or a plan gets adopted or something gets implemented, we'll send someone out for beer, and we'll fire up a Counter-Strike server, and we'll play this game called Counter-Strike. And we thought it would be fun to sort of challenge ourselves to get our office in the game. So this is our office, and we use the City of Chicago's GIS data. They have an open data portal, and we just wanted a one-block area. We didn't want to model all of downtown Chicago. So we used these visibility tools in GIS, thinned out the number of facades we had to model from I think about 4,000 to about 80. And so on the top, we're looking at, these are either reference photos we took when we were building this level, or photos that we use for textures. And we're in the second floor of this historic building in downtown. And so when you walk in our office, you're greeted by this orange sign. And the next slide is sort of a high-speed tour of our office inside of the game engine. And we turned it into a level just for fun. It was really a challenge, but the team building, the staff loved it. All of a sudden, we're sort of lobbing grenades at each other in this environment we all know so well. And it was all made possible through GIS and City Engine to do it. And the funny thing is we put it on our YouTube channel, and we had some of our clients look at it. And so Glen Ellen is a city that we're doing some work with. We're working with them on their comprehensive plan. And they're about 20 miles west of Chicago, a quiet sort of suburban community with a downtown that's quaint. And what we heard when we were working with the community was they want downtown to be small and quaint, but they want to expand it, and they want it to be exciting. And so sort of some competing interests. And developers were kind of moving past them because they didn't want the challenge of sort of fighting with residents in City Hall to get a development approved. And so the typical submittals you see from developers, these watercolor drawings, the community would be up till 1 a.m. at these public hearings, sort of arguing over building height and building character. So what we did is we took their GIS information, we used LiDAR, and we used LiDAR to find things like trees and building heights and roof forms, and we enriched all of that data. We brought it into City Engine, and we built a 3D model of their existing downtown. So this is the existing downtown. And then from there, we built an application inside of Unreal. We call it the Glen Ellen 3D Immersive Development Viewer. We spawn someone that they can walk around. They can teleport to any active development within the downtown. They can see what the existing conditions are. So here's a parking lot. A developer was proposing a multi-story mixed-use building. The community was at odds over, I think, a 3-foot variance in the height. And I think when they saw this, they're sitting there going, well, we can't tell the difference between 3 feet if we're a pedestrian on the ground. And so it's now changed the development process in this community. If you're developing in the downtown, the permit fees, I think they pay our firm like $1,000. We take their 3D model, we stuff it into this game, we send it back. The village council then can evaluate the development. There's a little camera button there. They can take photos, send it back to the planning staff and say, can you have the developer look at this? And so it's really, the credit we got from them was, now the meetings are done at a reasonable time, and it's been a success.
Amazing. Thanks, Devin. Important question. Do you have the Counter-Strike map ready in the demo room after the session?
I think I might, yeah.
All right, good. So moving on to the next question then. So how does GIS, game engines, mapping visualizations, how does that support policy making and planning? Alan, fully in your wheelhouse, so maybe you can kick this off.
Yeah, absolutely. So what you folks see in front of you is something called the Koi Sea Level Rise Constraint District Viewer. And this is a web map application that was associated with a policy that we passed about 2 years ago. But to really understand the significance of this policy, I kind of need to provide a little bit more context with a previous program that we adopted about 10 years ago. And that's something known as our Shoreline Setback Ordinance. And our Shoreline Setback Ordinance was our first attempt as a local government to bring science into our regulatory policy. It was a way where we worked with Dr. Chip Fletcher at the University of Hawaii and the Coastal Geology Group, and we got measurements of the rates of erosion on our shorelines, and we baked that science into a policy to tell individuals who are developing in these dynamic coastal areas what is the appropriate location to position a structure. The thing that was interesting about that effort is it was our first effort to, like I mentioned, bring in science into our policy, but it was all reliant on historic data. And this is a theme that we'll continue to discuss a little bit, because there is a strong legal precedent to use observed conditions, historic data, to say maybe the FEMA flood program, there are examples of storms. And because of this information, this rich data, we can say you need to elevate your structure. There's a mitigative action that you can pursue. And so once we had access to models about sea level rise associated with high wave runup or passive flooding, the question then became, how do we take these data and bring it into our regulatory framework in a manner that is legal? And the Sea Level Rise Constraint District is the result of that effort. And so it is a program that takes two modeled situations, like I just mentioned, well out into the 21st century, and requires folks to elevate their structures according to data about things that have not happened yet. And so that is kind of the bit of the new element here, was how do we bring the latest and greatest science into government? And to look up at the title of this slide, what we needed to do was to find better ways to bring in this data. That meant we needed mapping visualizations, a better vessel to absorb the latest and greatest science once it's produced by our colleagues in the academic community, such as George. And so the thing that was also exciting about this effort was because there's no way that paper can do justice to all of this data, it really required us to formally codify into law this web application. So formally in our bill, this web application is defined formally as the official source of authority. And so later on, when higher fidelity models are made available by members of the academic community, we can ingest that information into our policies so that we're really in a position where the latest and greatest science is informing our decision making. And that was a step that we didn't necessarily initially set out to do. I was very excited when we were able to adopt and move forward in this way. I'm sitting there thinking, local government, we're finally bringing technology into our legal system, our framework. This is great. I go to the Esri Geodesign Summit, ask some folks about this, and they're like, oh, that's really cool. We haven't seen that happening before. It's like, that's exciting, but with a degree of like, what's going on here? I was hoping to find someone to compare notes with to understand the implications of this. And later on at the Esri User Summit, we talked to some more folks. They directed me to somebody at the Library of Congress, and they said, yeah, we're gonna write about this because we haven't seen this happening before. And so then I kind of went back to my boss, the planning director, and was trying to get him really excited about this cool step that we took. And from there, we're just very excited because it seems as if we've identified a better policy vessel to take information such as models that George and his team produce into our built environment or our development codes for these really dynamic, sensitive ecosystems.
Thanks, Alan. Yeah, that just means that you're pushing the boundaries here, right? So, George, from your perspective, how's this technology impacting your work?
Yeah, so if you think about the work that Alan and Devin are doing and what you've just seen, it really underscores, I think, what is a critical message on this panel discussion, that we are using VR, AR, gaming engines, but we're not creating games for entertainment. We're building digital worlds, digital twins that mirror our world as closely as possible toward an outcome, toward a purpose to better our community and to better our world. And that can be pointed, in my case, it's pointed right now at coastal flooding and sea level rise, but it can be pointed at any hazard or any challenge that we face. And so that's really the crux of how we're using this technology. And one example of that, in our case in particular, is with our work with the city of Norfolk, which is where our university is. It's a very urbanized city, again, surrounded by water. And Norfolk is very forward thinking on protecting itself from sea level rise. They have to be. It's an existential threat. And so they've engaged with the Army Corps of Engineers to build a seawall and seawall mitigation structure that takes different forms, levees in some place and seawalls and floodgates and others. And they've done their own analysis of that protection factor. But they've engaged us at the university to do a more visual, robust, three-dimensional model using our flood modeling system and combining it with VR and AR to show what that protection might look like. And this was the graphic before that you saw was one of our first drafts at what that seawall might protect. And this is the same thing now when we take those data, we take actual planimetric data from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for their design of that seawall structure and then run flood models against that seawall infrastructure and show the city, show the Army Corps, show the community what areas are at risk and what areas are potentially protected. And we're not only doing this for the downtown area, which is our financial district and high value district, but it's important for us to do that through examine the local effects at specific neighborhoods throughout our community, those that might be socioeconomically disadvantaged, those that are often forgotten about. You know, when we think about floods and hazard and risk, community leaders often, the first thought is, well, what's worth the most money? Where are my transportation corridors at? And often who get left behind are those socioeconomically disadvantaged communities. And so we're being very purposeful about our focus on different areas like the financial sector, like the Navy base, and like those communities that don't necessarily have the means to help themselves. And ultimately, we take those visualizations that we're constructing in those models and bring them into something like a VR interface. So you put on the VR headset. This is one of our colleagues from Esri, Keith Van Groffelen, in the bottom left corner, viewing around the scene. And you can transport a viewer, a planner, a city manager, or a citizen directly into that flooded scene so that they can see the effects firsthand. And by using the best science, the best real-world data, we can make this as accurate and realistic as possible. So the thing I stress to people who put the headset on or that view our 3D visualizations is you're not looking at fiction. This is not a video game. We're so used to video games that we can create whatever we want in these video game engines. That's not what this is. This is our best representation of present or future reality that we can give based on the best science and data we have right now. And the more realistic we can make it with tools like these guys are using, the more powerful that message becomes. So I think that's our best use of it right now, and you'll hear more about our next steps later.
Thanks, George. So then to you, Devin, on this one, so for planning, how are you using GIS and game engines to sort of really propel forward your workflows?
Okay, well, I'll sort of demystify some of the work. I mentioned City Engine. We use City Engine a lot. And what it allows us to do is import GIS information. And so all that GIS shapefiles with the attributes, we're able then to tie those attributes to what's called a rule file in City Engine. It's CJ, computer-generated architecture. And it runs through a series of instructions where we can tie attributes within the data to the 3D model. And so we're able to generate 3D content very fast. So here's building footprint brought in with City Engine. I can start to tweak any type of variable I want. So I can change the width of those units. And I'm just sort of sculpting a mixed-use building. But what if it were a parking lot? I can drag a rule called parking lot. That shape instantly becomes a surface parking lot. If I change how that shape is, I drag it, that rule instantly creates that 3D geometry for us. But what if it wasn't a parking lot, if it was a parking deck? We have a rule that just creates parking decks. So we use City Engine to rapidly create these 3D models. And if a community has done a great job investing in GIS, we can build a 3D world very fast. And that was sort of our next challenge. Last year, we were sort of challenged by the municipality of Dubai to take their GIS data and build a digital twin of downtown Dubai, which is a pretty complicated area. Home of the Burj Khalifa, Dubai Mall, the fountains. And on the left is what they gave us. This is just their GIS information. On the right is what we did inside of GIS. We're able to sort of extrude. We had these great buildings, but with the help of City Engine, we created just a tool for our team to use. And so just taking their GIS, just by looking at images in City Engine, this is Sujan here working, and he's looking at a photo, and he's looking to see what's the color of glass, what's the window spacing like, is it steel, is it concrete, sort of what's the pattern of construction. And we had to move very fast. The city wanted us, I think it gave us about a 3-week turnaround and a teeny budget, $25,000. And so we gave Sujan about 5 minutes per building in terms of time. We had a lot of buildings to model. And so with this City Engine tool, there's the address downtown. He created it in, I think, about 7 minutes. Some of the more complicated ones took a little longer, but and then the end result, just some photos of some of the screenshots in the skyline. We knocked that out in just a couple of weeks, and I'll touch more on what we did with that in a later question. But there's a town outside of Raleigh, North Carolina called Morrisville, and we were hired by them to help them with a new town center. It's one of these towns that grew up without a downtown. They were looking for a focal point. So we created a downtown. So this is us inside of City Engine working through the program. What's it going to look like? There were some people in the community that wanted one-story buildings with surface parking lots, sort of a more rural character. Others wanted taller buildings with parking garages. As planners, we had to make sure that this thing could park out and that there was enough parking for people. And so City Engine has these great dashboards that gives our design team real feedback. So in this example, we know we had to elevate that parking garage to 7 stories to make sure it parked out. But it wasn't enough. We had to go into the game engine because the people that wanted the rural downtown, they were afraid that taller buildings would create a cavern effect, impact sort of the sense of enclosure of a pedestrian. And so from City Engine into the Unreal Engine, they're able to walk around this future place that we've designed, their town center, and they're able to sort of toggle between scenario A, 1 to 2 story buildings, versus scenario B. And we're bringing all of those key metrics in from GIS. How much is it going to cost? How many dwelling units, hotel rooms, office space? They're able to sort of fly around and contrast. And this community was stuck for about a decade on approving any development within this area because they didn't want to proceed down the wrong path. And within about 40 minutes at a town council meeting, showing them this unanimous recommendation to move to high density.
It's obviously all fantastic examples. I think also of just showing how bringing in all these different data types, creating your own data as well, and then sort of like the icing on the cake. So bringing all of that you've modeled in these tools into a game engine to create an even more immersive experience, that just sort of helps all the stakeholders better understand the impacts of what we're actually doing and the impacts that the data has. It's not just data sets. It all comes together and plays together. So then my next question, you're all already doing so much, but what are your future plans for integrating game engines into your projects? And I'll stay on you here, Devin.
Yeah, well, the first one, this is just a quick example of something we did for Cypress, California. There's something called, in California, a regional housing needs assessment. And so the state has given every community in California a mandate to demonstrate where their proportional share of housing to address the housing crisis. And if the city doesn't comply with the state mandate, they lose the ability to zone for multifamily. And so essentially every parcel and community becomes eligible for multifamily. So they have to prove that they can fit a certain number of dwelling units. Well, we found this site as a Payless Shoes and an IHOP, and we said, you can get 200 dwelling units on there. And it was met by skepticism by both the state and the city. So we built this out for them. We put it in a browser, which is the next slide. It's just sort of this 3D scene. We gave them the ability to sort of see it. And there's a concept here that was a little foreign to this community called a wrap, a parking wrap. So it's a parking deck skinned by buildings. And we had some people wonder how it all worked. How does it nest in there? We also had covered ground floor parking. So what we did is we built an augmented reality app. And so the next slide, it's available on the Apple App Store. Basically what it is I take out my phone, I scan any type of horizontal plane. It's going to detect that there's a plane there. So think of a table or your desk, and you simply just tap it, and it puts that 3D model on the countertop. And when I click expand, there's a little button in the top right. This sort of building pulls apart, and I can see how it's sort of is all nested together. And so that was, I think, a real good proof of concept for us. We're moving to the next step, which is image recognition. So the next part of that app will detect a site. Something else we're doing inside of game engines, we have an app called Map Social. It's how we collect community input. And so we can bring public comment right into the game. Here's someone's telling us they want street trees in downtown Morrisville. Well, they're there, check that box. Key transit destination, absolutely. This place needs to be serviced by transit. This person says, just build downtown. And we'll just stop it right there. What if one of you right now were on Map Social and participating in a workshop, and we're going to zoom into that intersection, and I'm going to sort of say, I want to build taller here. This is a key intersection in our downtown. We want taller buildings. So that's what I'm going to say here. Build taller, key intersection. We want tall buildings. We click submit. It stores it in the cloud. Now I come back into the game. I can click that Map Social button. Kind of like Hunger Games that sort of falls down from the sky. I can click on it, build taller. And now inside of the game, thanks to City Engine for Unreal Engine, we've brought our City Engine rules right into the game where we can respond in real time to how the comments that are coming in. So build taller. I click on a building. I change the height. We have a taller building. I could change the land use, lodging, multifamily. I could even change the design of the facade. And it does that in runtime or right inside of the game engine. So really cool. Impressive,
Devin. Very impressive. George, what are your future plans with regards to this technology?
As we design these visualizations, I think we're thinking that the more realistic we can make them, the more impactful they'll be. So we're driving toward that. And you see the great lengths Devin's team has gone to really add detail to the city, to the structures, to the buildings. And we're taking that approach a little differently in that we're using drones and fleets of drones to actually capture the exterior facades of our structures and our buildings. So that's a big next step for us. And what you're seeing now is a flood model scene with the Chrysler Museum, which is Chrysler Museum of Art, has about $250 million of art, and it was built right on an old infilled creek bed in the floodplain, completely vulnerable to sea level rise and flooding. So that's one of our target pieces of community infrastructure that's culturally sensitive, and it has great community recognition. And by using drone imagery and photogrammetry to create a 3D building model, we can bring our city to photorealistic life in these modeling interfaces. And then in turn, by taking that and putting it into a VR interface, we can hope to bring citizens, planners, et cetera, into the virtual reality environment. And again, the idea is to drive towards something better, more visually appealing, more impactful. And you see that's with Devin's work, and I'm taking notes from Devin's team as I look at his products as we go along. We've got a long way to go, and my hope is we combine things like those drone technologies and our skills in flood modeling with some of these techniques that they're using to make it even better. So that's sort of the first thrust, is let's make these visualizations as appealing, photorealistic, real life as possible. The other thing that I'm excited about that goes hand in hand with that is challenging that assumption that these visualizations do what they think that they do. We think they do. So as the architects of these visualizations and these VR environments and the things we do in game engines, we think they're really cool. They seem really cool to us, and that's why we do them. But we have to ask ourselves, are they really having the intended effect? Yeah, sure, they're cool. Are they changing people's perception of risk? Are they changing a policymaker's mind about a particular intervention? If they're not changing our environment, our community for the better, then all they are is pretty pictures. And so we're partnering with social scientists, and this is Professor at ODU, Dalia Ismail, to evaluate the efficacy of using VR technologies, gaming engines, to persuade, to change opinion, to alter one's perception of these risks. And by quantifying that, we're able to adjust what we do. So with the findings of this study, we may change our approach to our use of these technologies. We may find that people like something, people don't like other things. There may be things in these visualizations that people find more distracting than they find informative. Those are the things we need to know so we can clear our assumptions out and actually be productive in changing the message and improving our community. And so this is a really exciting, it's not as sexy as the 3D images, but it's as equally as important to the whole mission.
Yeah, it's a really great point about essentially walking a fine line between, creating something, an immersive experience that is actually adding value, right? You're not just doing something for the sake of it being cool or whatever, but it's actually a useful part to help us tackle these challenges, right? So,
and it's still cool.
And it's still
cool. Cool with the purpose.
Yeah,
cool with
absolutely.
the purpose.
Alan, what are some future implementations for the county body?
Yeah, so as you can see here, I added a rather devastating photo. And there's really two things I'd like to discuss here. One is a bit of an evolution of the work that we've been doing with the sea level rise work. As another thing I want to highlight a bit later is a community partnership. The reason why I bring this up is because we know quite well that the slow creep of sea level rise is not going to be the most devastating, impactful event that hits Kauai. It's going to be those heavy rainfall events and the occasional hurricane. And while we have been able successfully now to bring data about sea level rise into our regulatory framework, our development framework, there was a scholarly international consensus on sea level rise work. There certainly is not that same international consensus associated with hydrological modeling, atmospheric modeling, and especially when you couple that with the complicated microclimate geography of Hawaii, we realize that we have a ways to go. And so we're starting to see work associated with compound flooding models where there are combined efforts evaluating sea level rise with these heavy storm events. This is an example, a subset of the Hanalei area on Kauai. And very shortly, as these models become available island-wide, we hope to accommodate them into our development framework in a similar manner to protect lives and property. And so we've even seen some instances of researchers trying to ground truth some of their initial projections by evaluating traffic cameras and seeing the levels of water moving down roadways to ground truth whether or not their models about future conditions are going to be accurate. And so once these data are made available, we hope to absorb them into our regulatory framework in a manner similar with our work associated with sea level rise. And the second thing I do want to highlight is a community partnership. There's a community group on Kauai known as Kauai Dev. They are a creative media studio with the explicit intention of using these tools to communicate Hawaiian history and Hawaiian storytelling. And I think it's very important as we navigate these subjects that we're mindful of this transition from 2D to 3D to game engine, that there have been some very ill-conceived two-dimensional maps that have had some very challenging implications for many parts of the world. And so I think we're appropriately burdened with the responsibility of being very thoughtful, respectful, and courteous of these spaces, places, and locations that many people find sacred and valuable. So this is something that later this year we're hoping to really create a 3D working group, a community of practice on Kauai, to make sure as we develop these tools that they are sensitive to location and space. I highly recommend if you visit Kauai, give me a call, I'll give you a tour, and come show you this really cool AR experience at the Kauai Museum. So that's something that we're working on in the next hopefully next year, we'll be invited back and we can do a little bit more on the way that we can communicate and tell stories associated with some of these really special, amazing spaces.
That looks awesome, and you just said it, everyone again, so we can go knock on Alan's door.
That's right.
So then let's move on to our last question, at least from my side for this afternoon. It's on, can you give us your best predictions on what you all think is the next use of game engines, of real-time visualization technology in creating policy and planning? And I guess I'll also respond with a couple of my thoughts on this too, and you've all touched on this now, but game engines have evolved so far beyond games, right, and gaming. It is intersecting so many different fields now, and we're seeing more and more applications of it, right, as we've seen now in these 3 different use cases. So I am sure that this is just going to keep coming harder and faster with regards to the rise of this of real-time visualization technology. Also then going even beyond game engines, right? So, Alan, what are your crystal ball predictions for the future?
Sure, and something I'm just going to highlight here. This is a slide that we use a little bit regularly to communicate the workflow between ArcGIS Urban, City Engine, and these game engine tools. The ArcGIS Urban platform is very valuable because it allows folks who don't necessarily have 3D experience, but maybe they have planning experience, GIS experience, and it can help them start to understand how to use some of these tools. Even in rural environments such as Kauai, we can utilize tools like ArcGIS Urban to communicate novel types of zoning codes like form-based codes or objective design standards, both types of policy programming that have slightly different connotations. One is associated with form and character constraints, and other one's really designed to make the development process go a little bit quicker with objective design standards, which are done to remove more discretionary processes from development, especially in the midst of an affordable housing crisis. It's worthwhile for us to go through the exercise of identifying the specific things that we care most about our built environment, but not get so entrenched in the weeds that we cannot get anything done via discretionary processes through our commission or through our council. And the last thing I want to touch on is sort of this, we had this discussion with a different audience, and somebody had asked us what skill sets they need to start developing to engage in this work. And while it is really important for folks in the planning space and the GIS space to develop a skill set associated with 3D modeling, the most important thing that you can do is build a community of practice in your locality. Bring all the people together that are interested in 3D modeling, who are interested in storytelling, who are interested in seeing change in our policy. the way we communicate, the way we talk. And so this is something that I'd probably hone in on a little bit more as we look towards our future, is building these collaborative environments. We absolutely could not do our work with sea level rise without the amazing work of Dr. Chip Fletcher, Dr. Tiffany Anderson at the University of Hawaii. They're the ones that generated the models. We absorbed them into our regulatory framework. The work with Native Hawaiian communities, we certainly couldn't do that work without Kauai Dev and the amazing work that their team is doing. And so, yes, build those 3D skill sets, but building a community of practice in your locality that can help tailor these solutions to community goals is absolutely critical.
Thanks, Alan. George, moving on to you for your predictions.
Yeah, just in this short talk, we've heard a mention of a lot of different systems and frameworks. So like regulatory framework, flood models, transportation systems, building infrastructure, et cetera, and so forth. And these are all right now disconnected models. And when we talk about building out, towards a digital twin, we're often connecting those. We're taking outputs from this one and that one and pulling them together into a twin. And if we think about how these game engines work, and they have some physics rules built into them, and they're advancing and getting better, I see these things moving toward a singularity to be totally useful, to have a modeling environment where we're taking natural systems models, human systems models, regulatory frameworks, and really building a digital twin. Not just a digital, like, hey, here's some buildings in VR. A digital twin where if we build that flood wall, not only does the flood model change, but the economic model kicks in and it says, this is a difference in your economy based on this. This is what you'll win or lose. And transportation networks, the same thing. Health system networks. That's a digital twin. And that's an ambitious goal, but I see that as we're in the beginning phases of that, and that's really where I think we're going. And it's going to be, I hope I live long enough to see that unification, that singularity of digital twin modeling, because it's going to be really amazing. And I think it starts here with the work that all of us are doing, and hopefully some of you in the room too. So looking forward to that for sure. And I wanted to add one more thing, because we sit up here and the four of us and the handful of us, we don't do this stuff on our own. And so if we're moving toward that environment, that digital twin, real digital twin of the environment, or even twins that solve these massive challenges, and we're here also talking sort of about climate. We're thinking about how we're going to address climate change and, let's say, sea level rise, flooding, fire, extreme heat. Those things can't be done by graphical modelers in a room somewhere. They require this long chain of a team that starts with scientists and federal partners and extends all the way to communicators and PR specialists and storytellers. And we have to, if we bring that team approach with this type of technology, I think we're driving toward at least understanding these risks better, if not solving them. So I think that's a critical component at the end of this whole construction of digital twin. So.
Thanks, George. You just did the whole Steve Jobs and one more thing. So Devin, what's your one more thing?
I got a couple more things too. But before we start, I'd like to give Donna a plug from In-Situ. She has a session tomorrow at 4 o'clock on augmented reality, and not the what I had, like putting a building on a desk. Hers is like buildings on the street. So I think that's definitely that's not the future. That's happening now. I'm excited about Omniverse. We've been working with NVIDIA Omniverse as kind of our proof of concept. We're working with the city of Dallas on the Dallas land use plan. And what we've done there is we went through and built these place types. So Dallas doesn't want to just say this parcel is going to be residential and this parcel is going to be commercial. It's a big, complicated city. So they've identified 13 different place types across the city. We built them, these sort of little dioramas inside of City Engine. We then brought them into Omniverse. This is kind of, I think, dipping our toe in the pool. Later this month, NVIDIA has their GTC big conference, and I think they'll be announcing some new updates. I would call Omniverse a young game engine. It has things like UI and interaction, but ultimately what I think with NVIDIA coming into it is we're going to see machine learning and AI and be able to simulate things like these bots in these games that are trying to kill you. They adapt to your habits, and so they're incredibly smart. And so if I'm thinking of like a city, if we want to put a 4-lane road on a road diet, we're going to take away 2 lanes of traffic, add bike lanes, widen the sidewalk. Well, what happens to that traffic? And I think the game engines are going to allow us to simulate things before we move forward with implementation of real-world capital improvements. Let the game engine and the artificial intelligence show us whether or not that those roads can be narrowed. So I think that's big. The other example, all that work we did for Dubai was this proof of concept for a metaverse. And I've spent some time in Dubai the last few years, and that region is, the metaverse is sort of everywhere. And I saw this demo, and maybe before I get into it, I'll tell you what we did for Dubai. We built sort of a proof of concept for the metaverse. They called it the metaverse. I would just prefer to call it a digital twin or some type of ability to explore an area, maybe digital tourism. With this, we embedded like routing, a real estate scenario, a planning scenario. But at visiting this trade show in Dubai, I saw an absolute awing demo of a metaverse. Someone from a municipality there was walking me through their implementation, and they said, well, here, I'll show you how the metaverse works. And we had this little avatar, and we walked into City Hall, and then he walked me into the elevator. We went in a virtual elevator, went up to the 3rd floor. We walk out, it's the water department. He walks me over to the desk, and he's like, and now you can conduct business at the desk. And I'm like, what do you mean business? Like, well, you can pay your water bill. And I was just, it was probably the dumbest thing I'd seen. And I was thinking like, boy, I could have like taken my phone out, opened up a browser, paid my water bill. And now instead I gotta spawn into this virtual world, walk this guy, take a virtual elevator up to the 2nd floor. And it seemed like the metaverse was sort of, I don't know, they're looking for a reason to apply it. And that was what we did for Dubai, was we tried to think of real world value add. And definitely if this comes to here domestically, I think the cities here are a little more, are going to challenge us to give them a reason why. And the easiest example I could say is, well, they've invested a ton of money into GIS. For us to build that 3D world and that digital twin that George has been talking about can be pretty simple, and then allow us to start exploring all these other use cases.
Yeah, I mean, we said it before, we'll say it again, right? It's about creating things that are actually meaningful, right? And actually add value. And your thing about asking why are we doing it? We have to keep that in the back of our mind as technology rapidly advances.